Hey there, welcome to Authentically Raw. I'm your host, Jamie Darris. Today I have the privilege of welcoming the Therapy Sisters to the Authentically Raw podcast, Charis Pastor and Rachel Flowers. I will let them introduce themselves. Charis, go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Jamie. It's great to be here. I'm Charis Pastor, and I'm one half of the Therapy Sisters. I'm the older sister, so just in case that was a question in anyone's mind. Rachel and I are both clinical therapists. I've been in the field for, I have to do the math. I think it's more than 15 years. Maybe I shouldn't do the math. Maybe 15. We'll just stick with more than 15 years. I specialize in anxiety and women's issues, and most recently trauma. I actually worked in private practice for a very long time, but for the last 2 years, I've worked for a company that does kind of an EAP program. So it's a benefit through employers. It's a little more short-term, very focused cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's what I'm up to these days, besides the podcast with Rachel, which we launched in January. So it's keeping us busy, but it's been amazing.
I'm Rachel, the other half. I'm the younger sister, I guess, right? Not the youngest.
You know what I realized? The three of us, we complete each other's family unit, right? Because Jamie, you're the youngest of three sisters, and I'm the oldest, and Rachel's the middle.
Yes. See? There it is. There it is. Love it.
But,
sorry, Rachel.
Yeah. So I've also been a clinical therapist for, I don't know, 15 years too, probably, if I do the math. Maybe you've been a little longer because you graduated a couple years before me.
Yes.
And I started out with working primarily with just eating disorders, so anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. And then through time, like most diagnoses, there were multiple things going on. And so it kind of shift through time. And so now I do work with that a little bit, but I do a little bit more with disordered eating patterns, which a lot of women have that don't fit the criteria for an eating disorder. A lot of binge emotional eating. And then I do a lot of trauma work. So I spend my day job, I co-own a large private practice. So we have about 25 clinicians that we have working with us. And then I see clients throughout the week and mostly do a ton of EMDR and a ton of just CBT and trauma focused work. So I work a lot with women. I have a few men on my caseload, but I do a lot of anxiety, depression. And then, everybody has trauma. I think I thought early in my career that trauma was all the big T's, but I just, everybody has little T's that they have that have impacted the ways that they believe and behave. And so, as you'll hear on our podcast at some point, I also do a lot of ego states parts work. So a lot of healing of the little parts of us that need to be nurtured and cared for so we can integrate and just become healthier people. So I do that. And then Charis and I are both moms, and then we are both wives. And then we forgot that part. We do that. We're sisters.
I kept it profesh.
Oh yeah. I'll go into other things. We have dogs. We're dog moms. And
I also have a cat.
You have a cat. I don't like cats, but I like your cat.
He's super sweet.
He is sweet. But we just really, we started this, we launched in January, but we started this a couple years ago. And I think finally at a point where we have to get this off the ground, because I think for us, Jamie, this is such a good platform to reach more people, because our client work is so beautiful, but it's one-on-one. And this is such a good way to reach more women and normalize more situations and just talk about the hard stuff nobody talks about. So we can create a space where there's just community and connection, which is our ultimate goal. So we'd love for it to take off and be in a place we could do more and more with this. So thanks so much for having us.
Yeah. And thank you. And thank you for your podcast. I think you hit the nail on the head. You can work one-on-one, but when you have a podcast, you can reach so many more people, and your ripple effect is huge because there are so many issues that we do not talk about enough.
Yes.
And the second you start to talk about it, you hear me too, me too, me too. Everybody thinks struggling with all of life's stuff on their own, and it is not true. Everybody has that stuff, and we are too afraid really to speak up and talk about it.
Yes.
And speaking of, I had no idea I was going to throw this out there. I knew eventually someday I would. But I knew it couldn't be a solo cast. I knew I couldn't do it on my own, and it was something far in the making. And I really ran across your guys' podcast just in our group because we all took the course together and learned how to podcast and launch. And I was going through and reviewing. And when I listened to the therapy sisters, Charis and Rachel, I felt an instant connection. I felt, oh, yeah, I'm a sister here. We have so much in common with both of you. And especially Rachel, when you spoke about your anorexia. And I have struggled, and I can say I have been, I don't know if you call it healed from more of an exercise addiction. So I'm 47, and I can say that it's really only been within the last 5 years that I can really kind of talk about it a little bit and admit it out loud. I knew to myself, and I hid it. And I would say that this addiction started for me probably when I was about 18. Yeah. And so one thing I do want to mention is I've always been into the health, the wellness, the exercise. My degree is in, more of the exercise science. I taught in gyms. I did personal training. I'm all about health and nutrition and well-being. And I started out that way. And I was even though I think I started kind of that addiction around, my late teens, and I do feel like it started from a lot of direct and indirect messages, which from a very young age, I have 4 children. My oldest is about to turn 21 and my youngest is 9. And the things that they even say about their bodies at such a young age is appalling. And the messages that are sent, whether it is out in society through commercials, billboards, magazines, whatever, or directly spoken to you, or I think, at least for me, and I don't know how much people explore this, is the indirect messages of the way someone, let's say there is a person walking by and someone ridicules their body. Directed at that person, but personally for me, I took that internally to mean if I look that way, I'm not approved, I'm not worthy, I'm not valuable, I'm not loved. I do not want to look that way. And you mentioned you're a strong 2 on the Enneagram, more sensitive than we feel, and I, now I can realize where all of this came from, but how we internalize what our bodies should look like to feel worthy and loved, I think is universal, male, female, young, and the messages that are out there, they are in here. And how do we, rewire that thinking of getting back in line with ourselves and loving ourselves, because I see now it's that disconnect when I look back. I could tell a little bit more of my story, some of the real low points, but is there anything either one of you want to tap in so far to?
Yeah, I was going to say too, I think one of the things that people often don't think about too is when you compliment somebody's body, right? So I think about even as a little, my daughter is 9 and she's always been kind of a little wireful little girl. She's just long and lanky. But I have a friend whose daughter was a little bit chubbier and then she thinned out because she's having some stuff going on. And people commented oh, she's going into such a beautiful little girl. And thankfully my friend is very aware, but the messaging of that, the concern of what does that communicate to my little girl? Now you're this beautiful little girl because you've thinned out and everybody knows it, and commenting about things even in that manner. And I think I live in a world where, and you're this way too, Charis, we don't do that. We don't talk about our bodies or food or anything with our kids. We model health, all foods in moderation. And yes, we can get a treat, and yes, don't eat too much because your tummy will hurt, listening to your body type stuff. But I don't know that that's necessarily the norm for a lot of people on how they raise their kids, even if it's comments they make about themselves or even a projection of, there's nothing wrong with telling your kid you look so pretty today. But I think sometimes even the positive messages that people feel are positive, if a woman loses weight, you look fantastic. It just feeds that narrative of ooh, you're noticing, I'm going to keep going. And I think it's so interesting that we have the right to comment on somebody's body. Like no matter what, whether you've lost weight, you've gained weight, whatever, like the feeling that you have permission to say a word, which usually is your own stuff, that just keeps that narrative going in our culture, you know, like just noticing any of that.
Yeah, and it reinforces the message that like you're more valuable when you're smaller, or when when your body looks a certain way or fits a certain ideal, because we're highlighting that, or we're associating positive feedback or positive language around that, and it feels good, right? It feels good, but it's one of those things that it feels good in a way that's not good for us, right? Because it reinforces that exact kind of programming that's really deep. And you're so right, Jamie, like it starts at a really young age, and it is so internal, and I think it's a lifelong process to rewire that, you know, because a lot of times you don't even realize what you're carrying around until you're like our age, right? Until you're in your 30s and your 40s, and it's just like, oh wow, I didn't realize how much value I was placing on that, and then beginning that work is, I think, a journey.
And I think too, the prominent figures in your life, whether they're parental or, you know, family members, it could be teachers or coaches or somebody that you really have a connection to and admire. And how do they talk about their own body? How do they comment on other people's bodies? What kind of compliments are they giving you? We all register and process that so different. And for me, it definitely was, if I can be, you know, look this perfect way, which is impossible, because it's always
what
changing.
Is perfect,
right?
right.
The perception of what that perfection would look like for you, for them, for anybody, and you strive to do that. It's becomes an obsession and an addiction. And I can say, so I started to teach group exercise classes when I was in college. I started to teach, I went to Grand Valley State University, for all of us Michigan people, but I teach the staff members. I was a ripe old age of 19. And I also taught at like Grand Rapids Community College, you know, here in town. And so I taught like these older women, just loved it. As the years evolved, after, you know, I was more in my 20s, I started teaching at more gyms. And when I started to do that, it was, you know, more in my 20s, was married, and I started to teach the 5 and 6 a.m. crowd, and they are a driven crowd, right?
If you're
gonna, a lot of that was that. I mean, they are there, and they are, you know, back in the day when everybody was labeled that type A, and that's the crowd I was with. We all would run races, or they were big bikers, and it was hours and hours of working out was the thing to do. More, better. And there was a lot of that, a lot of commenting. And being up in front of the class, I began to feel all this pressure of, I don't look a certain way, I am not showing up for these people. You have to practice what you preach. You have to look a certain way. They're going to stop coming to your classes. So any compliments and anything, it actually had a really adverse effect on me. And I even remember when got pregnant with my first, and that pressure of, you need to keep your classes exactly the same for this entire pregnancy. I think back of that now, and I just, it breaks my heart that I even felt like that. And people would say, boy, you don't miss a beat. Your classes are still like, you know, super hard and this and that. And I look back how sick I was, you know, when I was sick like the first 5 months, powered through every day. 4 a.m. I mean, ridiculous. I'm sure my heart rate was higher than was healthy. Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind. Even going back, getting on the bike or in the classes when my son was like 5 weeks old, and you know, you sleep 45 minutes and you're up hours, you sleep another 45. I can remember nursing in the middle of the night, looking at the clock. Well, it's 3:30. I might as well just get ready to go to the gym.
Wow.
But you just keep, it's the why. What am I doing? And even in the midst of all the teaching, I kept a log, an exercise log. And if I ran anything less than 2,000 miles in a year, I felt like I was just worthless. And shame how you talk to yourself. And I would keep track of the hours. And I don't really know how well I hit it. I really, really worked hard to not show or not talk about, exercise too much or food or anything like that with my kids. And same thing with compliments. I do not compliment them on their looks very often. And sometimes I wonder if I probably should more, but I knew what was happening inside of me, and I never in a million years wanted my kids to feel this way.
Right.
Well, that's a lot. But I don't, and even if adults don't have, say, an if they're not anorexic, they're not bulimic, or they don't have an exercise addiction, I feel the real epidemic is that overall body image. And even with diet culture, I don't know if you guys were into the whole, like when I was in my early 20s, it was the fat-free stuff. So we tons of carbs and breads and gluten, which I have a huge sensitivity to. And the dairy was big, like it's just all this fat-free. And then it went into the zone, and now it's like the intermittent fasting. And you see everybody jump on, whether it's good for their body, whether it's healthy, whether it feels right. Maybe it makes you irritable, maybe it makes you sick, and we do it anyway.
I think I was going to say real quick, Jamie, about what you were saying about the gym and the pressure. There was no thought of, does that feel good to me? Right? Like it was just, you just went with it because it's what you were told. And so I think that's such a good example of like, I think because I'm so tender, the way things impacted, and we've shared bits of our story on our podcast, and obviously we were affected differently in our lives, right? Even like we're both tender people, but our reaction to emotion was really different, right? How we handled that was really different because of how we internalized it, right? And we come from the same family and have a lot of the same experiences, which is so, it's fun to see and interesting to see that you can have a lot of the similar things, including your genes, and have like a different outcome, And so it's interesting because I think it was probably the same for you, where it was like, okay, I have to do this. There's no thought of like that. And then the other thing that always gets me, I say this to clients all the time, the diet culture is the only industry that does not provide a refund for non-guaranteed. Everybody that diets usually gains the weight back and is frustrated that it, brings on that cycle of shame and all that personalized belief, which really is just the distortion of culture. And we keep paying for it. Like, in what other world do I get my hair done and it turns out purple and you don't refund my money, right? Or I buy meat at the grocery store and it's gross, stinky, and I return it and they say, oh, of course, we're so sorry. It's the only industry that is that toxic and that manipulative, and people keep believing it and buying into it, wanting more and more and more. And there's no thought of like, I'm getting the same result. It's not doing anything for me, because it's such a narrative of like you sell a lie. You'll be so much happier when, you'll feel better when. And I can tell you, there was never a time I stepped on that scale and felt better. It was like, ooh, what now? What else can I do? Okay, I accomplished. Okay. It was never like, yes, now I'm good, because it never really was about that. It was about my own regulation and my own inability to control whatever was happening around me. And I think until you start to think through some of that, like, do I like this? Does this work for me? Do I agree with this? Which some of it you probably couldn't do in your early 20s because you didn't know to. Who does? Who knows to do that?
Of course,
Your brain's not developed, right? So it's just interesting. Like, there's just no interruption of that still, like, because we just don't know different, Yeah.
I even feel just the one line that really pops up for me right now when you talk about that, like no refunds or whatever. It's the whole diet culture or body image, whatever the messages they send you, the more you hate yourself, the more they profit. And it really took me until midlife to, okay, I need to go internal. There is some things inside of me that I really need to work through. And it is, the more you hate yourself, the more you shame and disgust yourself, they profit. And it almost is like that rebellion now, like, screw you.
Right. Yes.
I love me now.
Yes. Yeah. Taking that analogy deeper, it's also like, you go to the salon and they dye your hair purple and you didn't want purple, and then you keep going back and you keep getting purple, or you keep buying the rotten chicken from the grocery store. You just keep buying it.
Who would do that?
A couple of things stood out to me, Jamie, too, as you were talking about that. And one was like, you know, the very black and white sort of belief. And I think this is true for a lot of women of like, I'm either successful by this measure or I'm an absolute failure, right? With no, like, where's the gray, right? Nothing in between of like, hey, some days I can kill it and other days I can't, like, I just can't do it. Like, I just have to rest, you know, and that sort of thing. But like those really extreme measures. And like, I know we sort of talked about too off the podcast about like the perfectionist piece, perfectionism piece. And so I think that's true for a lot of women too, like those incredibly high standards that we hold ourselves to. And even your example of you had a new baby and like it's 3:30 in the morning and I might as well go work out. You know, we just keep pushing, and we don't pause to listen. And I don't think we know to pause to listen until now, until things hit that fever pitch where it's like, now it's demanding our attention, right? And then the other thing too is just how that ends up again reinforcing and defining our value and our worth. When there's so many other markers and there's so many more valid ways to measure that. And actually, when it comes to worth, we don't have to have anything to measure it. We have, Rachel and I both believe in inherent worth. We're worthwhile because we're here. Good. We're human beings. You're just good. Yeah. So
yeah.
It reminds me too of, I feel it's almost a sort of punishment that we do to ourselves. And whereas now I look at exercise as a gift I give myself, and I approach so
such a good
different.
reframe.
I remember days of, I mean, my body always hurt. It always ached. There was something always injured, and it was a daily dose of ibuprofen. Keep going. Even it got to the point I, tore up my knee and had to have surgery. But up until that day of surgery, just keep popping the ibuprofen and go out and run. Just keep doing that.
Push through.
Oh, it was terrible. My chest always hurt. You know, when you are outside and you exercise, you run or you do something vigorous in the cold, and you just have that chest feeling of like, when I take a deep breath. I had that every day, all the time, because I would, and I even had, one of those watches that would track, how far you go, how fast you're running, just everything. And my mile had to be faster all the time. I wasn't running just over like a 6.5 minute mile, then you lazy, well, how can you because it's running on nothing.
Right. And it's trying to tell you,
slow down,
trying to speak to you. Yeah.
Yes. And I think, and I'm not going to lie. And there's not one person out there that doesn't exercise in one of the boxes to check is cosmetic, because I'm not going to say, oh, that has nothing to do with why I exercise.
Yeah.
Of course it does, but it is at the bottom of the list now. And it is more about going out there. I listen to podcasts, something inspiring. That's like my half meditation time, growing time, spiritual time, prayer. It is where I write my books. It's where I come up with podcast ideas. It's like, I can't wait to get out there because I give this gift, and it's connecting to nature and just like the fresh air. None of that was any part of it before, but it takes a lot to get to that point. And I think it's sad when we look around because so few people exercise for those reasons.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like now for you, actually, that reframe has allowed exercise to become almost a sacred space. It's where you're in your flow. It's where you're creative. It's where you're connected. And I think that's a sweet spot. That's like you said, there's multiple reasons why we exercise. And it's hard to get away from like the aesthetic piece of it, but reframing that around, I'm doing this for me because for me, it's become about, I want to be healthy. I want to be strong. I want to age well. I want to like, when I have grandkids one day, I want to be able to like chase them through the yard. I don't want to be sitting with a cane on the couch. You know what I mean? So it's about all of those things now, but I love that it did become sort of that sacred space for you. That's so connecting.
Well, and I was thinking as you were talking too, Jamie, like, what you're describing is that you are connecting back to yourself, which like you spent years
coming home to yourself.
Yes, you spent years. It might be a tagline of ours, but you spent years like leaving your body to do the things, right, or popping ibuprofen or feeling pain, ignoring it, and now it's like this is where I come back to my body, and so I don't want to miss that today. Like that feels very different than like an obligatory run,
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And, at the time I didn't realize, okay, all of this overdoing and whatever anybody does as far as, whether they shun themselves for what they're eating, hopping on this diet, or just the way they talk to themselves about their body or whatever habits they have, it's really stopping and asking yourself, well, who am I doing this for? Am I truly doing this for me? Because obviously I wasn't. It was for other people. And I think that is what is so pushed at us in society today. If you, think about it, if everybody, it's like you're doing this for the approval and acceptance of love of everybody else. It doesn't, it's not for the, I want strong bones. I mean, who gets on, who starts to exercise and is focused on building, muscle mass for the reason of I'm supporting my joints. So when I'm 80 and I don't break my hip, I am really working out my heart muscle today, or my lungs, my lung capacity, because when I'm 85, I mean, what are we really thinking of? And when we're focused on ourselves and why we're doing it and how it makes us feel, it changes everything.
It changes the relationship. Absolutely.
How do people get there?
Yeah. Well, I was curious, Jamie, if you don't mind me asking, like, what was your process? Like, what got your attention finally where you're like, oh my goodness, this is a problem for me? And it sounds like you had some awareness of that, right? Like internal awareness, but that conscious awareness of this is a problem for me. And then what was your process?
I was in the, in the fitness, we'll call it the fitness industry for almost 15 years before I knew I have to step out. I knew I was so burnt out, so exhausted, and I knew it was unhealthy because I remember why I went this way in the first place. And it really was just the love of overall well-being, physical, mental, emotional, and I was so far from that. But I still carried a lot of that with me even after I quit. And it just took a few more years, 3 more kids, right? So I have 4 kids, and I can say with my last 2, it was a big eye opener of how I want them to feel about their bodies. I just love them. I love them for who they are, not what they look like. And a big eye opener to me of why don't I love me for me, flaws and all, for who I am, not what I look like. And if people only like me, love me, accept me for what I look like and not who I am, I don't need them in my life anymore.
Yes.
And there's that quote, and I love this quote, stop seeking approval from people who don't even approve of themselves. And when I really started about like all these messages and where they came from and how I internalized them, it's all these messages of either directly or indirectly from people that don't approve of themselves, or a culture that does not want you to approve of yourself so they can make money off of you. Yeah. And it's kind of that, like, I'm smarter than that. I'm bigger than that. That was kind of my turning point. And no, it didn't turn quickly. It took several years, and I will still fall in that category every so often. I just don't stay there. The holidays come around and say you overindulge. And the first thing that comes into my mind is, I better get out there for a good 6 to 8 miles today. And I have to reel myself in. No, don't.
Right. Sort of that reward and punishment narrative.
So toxic.
Yeah, it really is. Yep. Yeah.
Well, I think the intuitive part, it's listening to your body. I know, Rachel, you talked about, some days it's a HIIT exercise. Some days it's yoga. Some days it's walking, right? That was Rachel, right? Or was that Charis? I'm listening. And
I think we both talked about it. We had a conversation about it.
Yeah, but just listening to your body and what does my body need? It's not what someone else needs for me. It's what do I need?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I think that's really loving, and so when you talk about process, I think there's a lot that goes hand in hand. We can't separate our emotional side or really our emotional side from our mental side from our physical health. Like it's all deeply interconnected, right? And so when we're talking about how do I start changing that relationship, it's really like changing the full relationship with yourself. And so, when you can say, today my body feels exhausted and I'm going to rest, that is a loving act. And that is a behavioral way to kind of address that and start moving that needle a little bit more towards self-love instead of self-loathing. And so when you listen in that way and you internalize that message of like, my body's exhausted, I'm going to listen to it, and then you do that more and more, and you just nurture that relationship with yourself. I think that's how the wheels of change begin. But I think it's a multi-level practice, right? So we've got the fitness and the physical side of it, and learning to kind of be responsive, learning to really figure out where limits are. Sometimes it's good to push our limits, right? Sometimes it's good to like get over a hurdle, and that's as much of a mental challenge as it is a physical challenge, right? But sometimes it's not good for us, and we need, part of it is just building that awareness. I think a lot of people don't even recognize that within their own body, though. There's a lot of disconnect. And so like you said, looking back like that with your hindsight, you can see, okay, my body was telling me I was having all these pains. I needed surgery at one point. Your habits were telling you something was out of alignment, right? And so just really starting to evaluate and just paying attention, I think, is a great first step. But also just want to acknowledge that is hard work, especially when we haven't been accustomed to that. And if we can not wait until our body screams at us for attention, because eventually it will. We can't, that's not sustainable long term. But if we can start that process now, even if like you don't have a good relationship with your body and with working out and that sort of thing, but you just start paying attention, that's a great kind of first step. But the whole process, it's so holistic across all the aspects of who we are. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Rachel?
Well, I was just going to say to you, I think one of the things that's really tricky when you have a disordered way of thinking surrounding your body is, I'm sure you experienced this, Jamie, a little bit that you said, but the shame narrative is so loud. And so I think like, and I shared this in our physical podcast, like I'm still a work in progress as far as like my body is communicating to me surrounding like autoimmune stuff, right? Because there are days where I have caught myself in a spiral of like, oh crap, what did I do? What did I eat that is like activating this physical symptom right now? And there's a blame in that instead of like, oh, my body is communicating something to me and something feels off. So I'm just going to put my hand over my heart and offer kindness to myself. I hear you. I will take care of you today. I will make sure that I eat foods that nourish me well today. Because I mean, I don't know. I think my body has been through a lot. And so I think when you go through a space of recovery, which I'm not sure your journey of that, Jamie, but mine involves going to therapy and working through all of that. It was a lot of work to undo just that narrative of shame. And it was so loud and so present and I think I shared this in one of our podcasts too, but I hadn't really experienced it again until I had a baby and I was trying to breastfeed and it wasn't working. Like I pumped more than probably 10 women combined. I smelled like every single sap you could put on your chest to make more milk production. And I remember before I got pregnant, being very aware of like, this is the first time my body has legitimately changed since I've been well. And it didn't affect me like that. Like I was in such a healthy space. It was a baby, like my belly was growing, everything felt good. And I think, I don't know, like maybe it's just health. Maybe I was protected from some of that. I don't know. But when I had my baby, I didn't even go into that space. What I did go into is like, I'm not adequate because I can't breastfeed. And so then all that shame came back again until I realized like, oh, that's my eating disorder's voice in a whole different way, because it was about inadequacy and shame. And once I really worked through that, which thank God, like, I know Charis likes to remind me, she's like, I told you to quit breastfeeding. But it was such a process. Like it was such a hard process because I couldn't even figure out why I was reacting the way I was and putting such urgency on myself to do this the right way. And so I think it's interesting because it's so easy to say like, oh, and this isn't what we're saying, but I think it's easy for people to say like, listen to your body. When for some people, if I sit and listen to my body, I'm going to feel real bad. Like if I really sit down and listen to like what that's communicating to me, I'm going to feel like I can't do that. And that's part of why the behaviors exist, right? Because if I escape, I don't have to feel it. And so I think the shame part, like the undoing of the narrative, because the narrative builds, like you might start with exercise, right? And then you have this narrative of, I need to do more, I need to go harder, I need to be fitter, I need to look this way, which just then filters into every other behavior you have about your body. And it isn't about listening or realizing your body's been there all along. She's never done you wrong. She's never hurt you. But I think going back to what you were saying, Charis, like really getting to a place of like, how do you offer self-compassion and kindness? Because you would never speak to your best friend the way you speak to yourself, ever.
Right.
Like I would never look at my best friend and be like, well, you probably should have eaten those nachos last night. That's why your belly's upset this morning. I would say, oh my gosh, let me bring you some soothing tea. I'm so sorry you don't feel good, but I'm here, you know? And so it's even just that I'm here to your own body is sometimes they're like, oh, okay.
One thing I thought of, and this kind of dawned on me probably only about 2 years ago, is that I feel I was avoiding rejection and shame, but yet what I was doing was rejecting myself and shaming myself. I can just do this to myself, then I won't have to feel it from the outside. I wasn't really thinking this in my head, or subconsciously I obviously was for decades without realizing it. But it's like, if I can just do this to myself, I'm going to avoid someone rejecting me or someone shaming me. And I just, you ended up doing it. You do it to yourself. And it's like you said, it's never enough. When am I going to finally be satisfied with, the way I look, the way I exercise? It's never enough.
Yeah. And go ahead, Sarah.
No, you're good.
Oh, I was going to say, like, that's such a good example of like a self-preserving defense mechanism, right? So if I do these things, you can't hurt me. And it's interesting because those things develop subconsciously. Like nobody knows. I mean, those are things that, I might point out to a client and they're like, oh, you're so right. But they don't know it because you don't know it. You're just living your life, right? And so it takes like that, looking back to recognize like I was totally in a space of protecting myself so I couldn't get hurt. And I think there's such a shift from protection to being with yourself, because if someone does reject me, I have me now, right?
That's exactly
and that's all I need. And I mean, granted, I have wonderful supports, right? But like, there's such, when you leave your body, you don't know yourself or your body. When you come into your body, you can really evaluate, like, is that a true statement? Is that a fair feeling? Is that my stuff or yours? And then when you have wonderful supports who will tell you the truth, you can really process through that. Like, did I do this, Charis? Or what do you think? And like walk through it, which is such a beautiful space to live in. And it, like what you were saying, Charis, it's gray. And you'll have to have it all figured out because you're just living your life in a really self-aware, present way, So it just, it's interesting how, you can really shift that need to preserve to just being present. I don't need to protect myself if I'm in myself, right? Because I would be willing to bet, Jamie, now when you're not in yourself. Like, now if you're not okay, which is dysregulation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awareness just takes time to.
It does.
It takes time to develop. The thing is I feel like I've always been very self-aware, but I was just in such denial. I don't, that's it. I'm fine now. It just, I keep trucking through, going on. And now the self-awareness it's just evolved, I guess, in the form of, okay, pay attention to this, nurture yourself. One thing I want to point out, and I want your take on this, and I don't want to have it come across as like nitpicking or criticizing, but one thing I have really been aware of the last year or two, and I've stopped doing it, and I've commented a little bit even to my daughters, is do you ever notice when there's a group of women or even just two women that take a picture, what does the woman on the outside do with her arm? It's always like this, right? And why is that? Because then I want my arm to look thin. If you scroll in, your pictures that people post, anything, it makes me sad, because that's not a natural thing to do, to walk around with our arms on our hips, but it's those little things, or how the legs are posted. And even in young girls, how even if they don't have anything beyond that, it's still that message of, I have to pose in this way to look a certain way
to be acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think with little kids, like, I think some of that stuff is on the Disney Channel. Like, there's stuff my daughter said where I'm like, whoa, or even like, this is silly, but like, my son for sure learned shut up from the Disney Channel, right? He's 7. Like, where did you learn that? I don't know. And then my daughter will say, from the show, right? But I think, it's interesting because my daughter is 9 and I see some of that in her. And I think it is what she observes from, or like, she loves watching gymnasts because she's a gymnast. And even that, like, so-and-so does this, so-and-so does this, so-and-so does this.
Yeah.
Like there is like a commenting or a learning about things. And we have lots of conversations about like, all bodies are good and all bodies look different. And the body is just the place that you live in, right? And what matters is how kind you are, all these other things, right? But like, yeah, those narratives are everywhere. And I also think too, I'm going off a rabbit trail for a minute, but I also think too, one of the things I've had to keep in mind, because I don't know if you do this, Jamie, but I definitely, and you've helped me with this too, Charis, like, well, maybe it means this, but because of my own history and never wanting my children to go through what I did, sometimes they'll say things and I'll hear something and I'll kind of have this internal panic response. And then I realize, oh, no, I'm hearing that at 38, she's 9. So what she meant by that was this, but what I heard in it was this. And so even the clarifying question of like, what does that mean to you? Oh, it just means like, what was it? Something about her legs. Like, what does that mean to you? Oh, it just means that I feel like I am not as tall as my friend who's 2 inches taller than me. Oh, that's not what I heard at all. I should have worn my fleece pants today. I don't like my legs. What does that mean? Well, I'm cold. I should have worn my fleece pants today. Oh, where I'm like, oh my gosh, you're like, what do you mean you don't like your legs? So it's so funny because I think even one of the things Charis and I talk a lot about is like just being curious to experience. So I think that's our own experience, but I think that's also the experience of our children. But then I think even in that, like there can be compassion for the pose, right? Because that narrative comes from somewhere and we're all behaving out of what we know. And so I think it's sad, but there's also a space of, okay, so there's some work to do here. People feel that pressure to respond that way, or they don't even know they are. Because lots of us don't. I mean, most of us don't know who we're doing,
Yeah, I had that thought, like that the hand on the hip sort of thing I think for most is not even a conscious act.
Yeah.
You just get into that pose because that's what you do. And that's what you've seen others do. And like you said, it's like, yeah, exactly. So and it is sad to see it among, younger girls and that sort of thing. But I think the conversation piece is important. The curiosity is so important. And the compassion, compassion for ourselves. If you look back on a picture of yourself and you see yourself doing that, compassion for who that woman was then versus who you are now, because you didn't know then the things that you know now. And then compassion for other people, like, oh, look at like however that kind of manifests in your head, but just kind of that loving, curious bend can be so powerful in helping to I guess just navigate through that and figure out what do we do with that information then.
Yeah. And I think it's that self-awareness of, wait a minute, why am I posing this way? What is it that I'm really doing? And what for? Am I any less of a person? Am I beautiful regardless, inside and out? And it's, but it takes work to be able to get to that point.
It does. Yeah.
And Rachel, and you want to point on any of your history? I didn't know.
What was that, Jamie? Sorry?
With your anorexia, what was your process and your healing, and that, how did that look for you?
Yeah. So, I got busted my senior year of high school. I remember my mom, I think my mom was a little curious, but she figured it out and I couldn't lie to her anymore. It's interesting. When you moved out, Charis, you left a book behind and I moved into her room and I read it, and it was written by someone who was recovered from bulimia. And I didn't know what I was doing. So I read it and I remember having this moment of like, oh, I do these things. Like there's something wrong. And I literally remember that closet on North Highland Drive. I love that. Yeah, Highland Drive. I literally found it. It was from some conference you went to, like some youth conference. It was Ron Luce's wife. I found it in the closet, and I don't know why I read it, but I did. Probably because I think it was like beauty was in the title, and it probably thought it taught me how to be beautiful.
But
or
like,
because it was mine.
Yeah,
You
read it
because
because it was mine.
This is how she got so beautiful. But yeah, I read it, and I think I sat with that for a few months, because there was so much shame. And I think, we grew up in a pretty conservative Christian culture, and so I had a lot of pressure of being like the good girl, and that's not a very good girl behavior. And I think I didn't understand that there was a deep root to that, and that it actually wasn't about me being vain or caring about how I looked, but that's what I thought. Like, people are going to think this thing about me. So I guess two people. So anyway, I ended up getting busted. I don't think my parents knew what to do, because it wasn't like, that wasn't a prevalent thing back then. Like, now it's everywhere. Like, I don't think they knew what to do. So I went to therapy for a few months, and then I moved 1,000 miles away and kept it up for a few years. And I think like a lot of disordered eating, mine flopped between different avenues of doing that. And so I gained a ton of weight because I was binging so much. And I think because I gained weight, I think my parents thought I was okay. Like, because I put on a bunch of weight, like, oh, she's gained her normal, quote, college weight, she's fine, right? Which was like my worst case fear, and felt very panicked. So long story short, I ended up going to therapy for myself around 21. When I graduated college, and I entered into my first job as a social worker, and had ended a long-term relationship and was just kind of alone with myself. And I was working at a residential home for at-risk teen moms, and this woman came to speak about eating disorders. And I was sitting there like, oh my gosh, she knows. She knows. Look at me. She is here because this isn't about my clients. This is about me. And so I don't know what made me do it, but I was brave. I think it was really brave at 21 to go up to her and say, hey, I need some help. And she referred me to a therapist who was recovered. And, because I am kind of type A, like, I was really motivated to do the work. But what's interesting is I'm still doing the work. Like, I don't have eating disorder behaviors anymore, and I don't misuse exercise or any other things. Like, I really love food now. I really love movement. I really love my body and being in my body. I don't spend hours looking in the mirror, obsessing over, it's just, I'm getting older, and there's things that are changing, and that's fine. But I'm always in recovery as far as my awareness of how I communicate with my body. And even like some of the stuff, how do I word this? Like, I'll call it little traumas, like little emotional traumas that I didn't know were in there that were affecting my body, that I'm still in the process of working through. And I think rather than being angry about that, like, and I do have days where I'm angry for sure. Ask Charis, you can see our texting log where I'm like, my body today is not working well. Like, it is really healing to be in a space of, and now I have more information and tools to take care of her and listen to her and be with her. So I think body work is ongoing, whether you've had a history of eating disorder or not.
Yeah.
I think even with my daughter, like, there's something where she had indigestion the other night, and she gets kind of nervous about that sort of thing. And so I had her tap, which is something you do in EMDR to install cognition. And I had her say, like, I am good. And she said, I am good. My body is good. My body is good. My body is communicating to me. My mommy is here for me. And she just kept doing it. And then she went to sleep because she already has this, like, why do I feel this way? And there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with you. You have gas because you had too much food. Like, your body's just acting normally. But she's a lot like me. And so she had that narrative of like, and I'm like, it's just communicating to you, and we just got to listen to it. And so I think even in that, I feel like I continually heal myself as I do it different with my kids, and it's just such a work in progress. And I love, like, even going back to the gray, like, I love that we're in process. There's so much freedom in I'm in process instead of like I'm arriving, or like, I'm recovered from an eating disorder, but I'm always going to be in recovery as a person. Right. Like, I'm always going to be healing and growing, because I could talk for hours, but there's so many things that went into me besides just the behaviors. The behaviors were just information about what needed healed. They gave me a lot of information
about the underlying problem. It's more of an underlying problem, and even to have the support of other people and speak up and get help. Any last words, Charis?
Yeah, the quote that keeps going through my mind is one that I'm sure I've shared maybe multiple times, but just as we're talking about this and I don't know who said it, and it's very simple, but it's just, it takes your whole life to grow up.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true. I know I know that sometimes that I've shared that with a couple people, and it's incited a little panic, like, what? Because it's that black and white, I want to arrive kind of mindset. And I think one of the most important shifts we can make is that, like Rachel was saying, we're always in process. We're always growing. We're always learning. It's not done when we reach adulthood. In fact, most of it begins when we reach adulthood. And so just trying to move to that more compassionate, curious space of we are always in process, and it takes our whole lives.
And thank God we are, like.
Yeah. I find a lot of liberation in it.
Like if we arrive, we stop growing. I don't ever want to be a person who's like, yep, that's how I am.
I'm here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Charis and Rachel. This has been
Thank you, Jamie.
Definitely. So any place, do you want to quick say where people could find you? Instagram, you are the Therapy Sisters, correct?
Yep, we're at _therapy_sisters. And then we're also on Facebook. I think it's at the Therapy Sisters podcast.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for being here as we kick off this podcast together. I really appreciate you joining me on this journey because I'm well aware you could be doing or listening to anything right now. Hey, if you enjoy the Authentically Raw content, please support the show by following, rating, and reviewing on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can also follow me on social media for daily inspiration. Head over to my website, jamiebarris.com, to sign up for weekly transformation tips. Or if you're interested in coaching, I currently have 3 openings for one-on-one coaching. If you're looking for an empowering community, we'd love for you to join us in the Transformation Tribe, our group coaching membership. More info available on my website under the Life Coaching and Membership tabs. One last thing, I'm rooting for you. Be real, be raw, be authentic.